1.
Wish I could drift away out on the September breeze, just fade into the gray. Get what you just said to me, I don't know if I wanna know. Saw her in the dark. Beside her was a fallen star. Had to look away, wipe the tears from my face. I am waiting here for you. I am waiting. I don't know what to do about it. I am waiting here for you. She said, I am waiting here for you. Right here for you. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Gathered there to pray as she hung her head to cry. She said it's really strange, September through eyes of July. Da, 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 da. Ha, da, 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 da. Ha, da, 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 da. Ha, da, 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 da. I am waiting here for you. She said, I am waiting. I don't know what to do about it. I am waiting here for you. She said, I'm waiting here for you. Right here for you. I remember when they fell from the sky. I can still recall the look in her eye. I remember when they fell from the sky. That September on the wings of a line. Wish I could drift away out on the September breeze, just fade into the gray. Forget how everything just changed.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Patriot Transition Voice. That amazing song you just heard is by a friend of the show, Song Babe, and it's Waiting in September. And what a perfect opportunity to play that song again.
Yes.
We played it on 9/11, but we have a guest tonight that kind of fits the topic.
Yes.
My name's Stephen Lundgren, my co host Duncan.
Guys, glad to have you with us again for another episode. It's an update on my mother. Is she's up and down. She's still hanging in there. She's doing well. She's going to knock this COVID out here completely soon. So just thank you all for the prayers. I certainly appreciate it.
Yes, I appreciate the update, and you seem to be doing better.
I'm good at pretending that I'm in tip top shape when we're on this show, and then I go to bed.
Tippy top.
Tippy top.
We got a great guest tonight. He was a captain, and he's got 35 years of civilian and military um, aircraft experience. He ended his career in flying 777s, and uh, and he is a 9/11 whistleblower. So welcome to the show, Captain Dan Hanley.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Dustin. It's
Thank
a
you.
pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
We're glad you're here. It's always a good topic. There's so many theories out there, but you got history of looking at things differently, and you kind of saw something that stood out to you most about this, and you were willing to be one of those that spoke out about it, and it brought your career to an end because of it. But before we get to all that, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself and
Sure.
how you ended up where you are now?
Okay. Well, I was a pilot my entire working life, and I started flying at age 19 over 50 years ago in 1968. First as a civilian pilot, where I flew flight Cessnas, twin engine aircraft, and I got my private commercial instrument and multi-engine rating. Had about 350 hours, which is probably equal or more than what the 9/11 hijackers had. And that was in 1970. And I went on to Southern Illinois University to get a 4-year degree in math. And when I got out in 1973, the Vietnam War was still raging, and I had to make service plans. So I chose naval aviation and entered the military in 1973. I flew 3 training aircraft in the Navy before getting my wings in April of 74. And for over the next 10 years, I flew the 4-engine turboprop, the P-3 Orion aircraft that was used to track Soviet submarines during the Cold War. In 1978, I was hired by United Airlines as a pilot, and over the course of the next 25 years, I flew about 7 different commercial airliners, including the Boeing 767 and 757 that were used on 9/11. And in December 2003, I tragically lost my job at United Airlines. They illegally terminated me. You need 2 pieces of paper to fly commercial jet aircraft. One is your license, and the other is a medical certificate. And they're both issued by the federal government and the Federal Aviation Administration, United Management, and my union, ALPA, colluded to run me off the property on a bogus medical diagnosis. So that entire ordeal cost me a 27-year marriage, the alienation of my 2 children, who blame me for the divorce, still believe the official 9/11 story, think I'm a whacked out conspiracy nut. They don't talk to me. So besides losing my career and my reputation as a pilot, I lost over $4 million in paid pension stock. Uh, I presently serve as the director and international public spokesperson for a global grassroots effort called 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers, whose purpose is to show that there were no Muslim hijackers at the controls of the 9/11 aircraft, but that these aircraft were electronically hijacked through employment of a system called the uninterruptible autopilot, which we'll get into later, that enables a remote source to take complete control of the aircraft, autopilot and flight management computers, and guide it to its target. Now, once the system's engaged, the pilots can no longer disconnect the system. They're along for the ride, as are the passengers. The goals of our organization is to recruit highly experienced military and civilian pilots, whether they're active duty or retired, uh, to attest to the fact that not only we're recording them on tape, and I'll explain why, uh, that not only could these hijackers not have flown the flight profiles on 9/11, but that they could not have flown them themselves. And on our website, 911pilot.org, we give an example of American Airlines Flight 77 that struck the Pentagon. Now, Hani Hanjour will go into detail about his flight credentials or lack thereof, but he was a 29-year-old Saudi Arabian pilot who had flown Cessnas. And he approached the Pentagon, or the aircraft did, and at 7,000 feet, it started 330-degree corkscrew descending and accelerating turns to arrive precisely at ground level at over 500 miles an hour to strike the Office of Naval Intelligence at the Pentagon without striking the service, and on his first attempt. Now, this same maneuver, another grassroots group called Pilots for 9/11 Truth, hopped in a Boeing 757 simulator and replicated this exact maneuver, and almost without exception, they crashed the simulator. And the one exception I'm aware of is a seasoned Boeing 767 captain named Philip Marshall, who managed to strike the building on his 20th attempt. So it's foolish to believe the official story in that regard. So I can get into where we're going with this. A lot of people haven't heard of this group I'm going to talk about because the mainstream media refuses to cover them where it should be on 24/7 news cycle based on what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And what happened there was a group of U.S. lawyers got together with the biggest 9/11 whistleblowers in the world, and they compiled 57 evidence packages and presented them to the U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman in New York City, and forced him to convene a grand jury investigation into their allegations that World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, and 7, and yes, there was a third building that came down that day, were brought down by controlled demolition and not by jet aircraft impact damage or the fuel fires that ensued. So some of the whistleblowers that they've got testimony from or evidence from is architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, another grassroots movement that was founded by architect Richard Gage, a 20-year architect from San Francisco. And they have gotten together with 3,000 architects, over 3,000 architects and engineers worldwide, who have attested to the fact that it was structurally impossible for the twin towers to have been brought down by jet aircraft impact. It's just structurally impossible. Another group of scientists, excuse me, got together and collected dust samples from the World Trade Center site and analyzed it, and they conclusively have proven that a substance that burns at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit called nanothermite was found throughout the debris fields of all three Trade Center buildings. Now you say, what significance is that? Well, jet fuel burns at a temperature of 1,500 degrees. Steel melts at 2,750. And yet there was molten steel, iron seen pouring out of the building, the Twin Towers, prior to their collapse. And for weeks thereafter, firemen waited around in this lava-like flow in the debris field. So their contention is that the nanothermite was pre-planted, and that's what was brought down. And I'll just cover real quickly, the police who gave testimony, heard explosions both before and during the building collapse. So, and I could get into William Rodriguez. He was a janitor at the World Trade Center and who heard explosions in the basement just prior to aircraft impact. He was brought to he was brought to Washington, D.C. because he helped rescue people out of the building. And it wasn't until he got before the committee that they were questioning about what happened. And he said, oh, by the way, these explosions occurred before the building collapsed, and all the fanfare went away because they gave him a hero award. They were promising a book, a CD. They wanted him to run but William, I know, has spent the last 20 years going around the world telling his story. So what we're doing, the reason I brought them up is we're going to follow suit. 911pilot.org is going to follow suit, and we're gathering testimony from pilots around the world, and the lawyers are going to depose them, get a deposition from them, and we have additional evidence, and we want to create our own evidence packages and hopefully present it to a U.S. attorney so that they'll convene a grand jury and our allegations that these hijackers couldn't have flown the aircraft. And lastly, I filed an FAA whistleblower report in August on behalf of the organization and via their hotline, and I did a data dump on them, providing them with a lot of information on it and evidence, not just on the uninterruptible autopilot, but other information as well. And they acknowledged it. They sent me a receipt, and the next thing I know, I get an email from an FAA aircraft engineer in Seattle who said he'd be my point of contact, and he wanted to set up a three-way conference call the next day. And I sent him more information, and he came back with an email saying, well, we didn't realize the depth and breadth of the information you had. We want some time to digest it, but I called him anyhow. And we had about a 10-minute conversation where I told him where we were going with this. And after that, he shut down communications completely with me. He wouldn't answer my emails or the phone. I left him multiple voicemail messages. So I finally emailed his boss in Washington, D.C. saying, hey, what gives? I had open dialogue here, and now he's clammed up on me. And she forwarded back to the FAA hotline people, and I'll leave it at that. Where they are right now is they're stonewalling me. They're trying to. But,
so, real quick on the commission, is there more than one grand jury commission going on? Is there another one that I hear rumors about, but that's not as public? Do you know of any?
I haven't heard of them. The only one, I always say that the Lawyers Committee is the only legal act on the planet that's addressing 9/11. You know, I've been on Facebook, Twitter, and all these social media platforms where people debate and argue back and forth. I go, hey, do something constructive, get it into the legal arena, try to get it into mainstream media, which they're not successful in doing right now. They're going all over on programs such as yours talking about this stuff. But I don't know of any other grand jury investigation. And I failed to mention Professor Halsey from the University of Alaska several months ago produced a 4-year study on the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that building, it's the Salomon Brothers building at 5:20 in the afternoon on 9/11. This 47-story structure fell almost symmetrically at near the free fall acceleration due to gravity into its own footprint. And the National Institute of Standards and Technology that the government had contracted to do an investigation into this claimed that it was caused by a few office fires, which is impossible. And Professor Halsey's study using computer modeling and the scientific method have proved conclusively that 47 beams collapsed almost simultaneously into its own footprint. Now, NIST has this, and they stuck with when they filed this, NIST stuck with their official story that it was a one beam that collapsed that caused the rest of the building to come down as a result of office fires. So the Lawyers Committee had to file an appeal, which they did. And NIST is still standing by their story. The National Institute of Standards and Technology is still standing by their story. So I believe the Lawyers Committee right now is taking legal action. They're going to file suit against the Department of Justice and the FBI because there is no apparent forward movement on this grand jury investigation.
Wow. I remember. I think almost everybody here can remember what they were doing when this all
Mm.
went down. And oddly enough, I was going to film school, and a couple of days prior to that, we were having a discussion on melting steel for a movie we were working on and what we would need to make that happen. And we all determined there's nothing that we have that's going to make that happen. And
Right.
then when I saw the building, the first building come down, I want to say it was within the week of that discussion we had had. The very first thing I thought was I thought back to Oklahoma City and how certain things about that just didn't seem right to me, and that's what made me start looking at this one with a little bit of an open mind. And the first thing that I thought to myself was, when you chop a tree down, you chop it down from the bottom, and then the whole thing falls over. But this plane hit the top and somehow managed to crumble a building straight down. Then I thought, well, no fuel that we have is going to be able to melt steel like you were saying earlier, so it had to have been something different. And then I thought the same thing. When you cut a tree down, the tree doesn't collapse straight down, it falls over. And you would expect a building that was compromised to do something similar to that. So when Building 7 came down, that was completely unharmed by any planes, like, to me, I didn't need any other proof that there was something nefarious about what took place.
Yeah.
Right. And you look at the fact these 110-story structures comprised of steel and concrete were dustified
Mm-hmm.
all the way
Hmm.
to the surface in less than 11 seconds. So
Yes.
I want to point out to people that never in the history of steel reinforced high rise building in the 100-year history of skyscrapers has any ever been brought down due to fire. And on 9/11, three of them did.
Yes.
Right. We always get that comment every time I report a building or a tower or something on fire. There's always the comment, well, see, it didn't burn, it didn't fall down.
Yeah, there was a
Yeah.
building somewhere over in Europe. I mean, it was years prior to that that caught on fire from the bottom to the top. This building was built, I want to say, easily in the 1500s, maybe a little bit later than that, but they weren't built like our buildings are today in New York. And that those
Right.
buildings somehow managed to withstand a way worse fire from what it looked like to me than what we all witnessed on 9/11.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So people ask me, why are you doing this? I'm 71 years old, and it's not just me. I'll talk about how you can join us on the website, but we're not just doing it for the 2,977 victims that were murdered in the United States on 9/11, but we're also doing it for the millions of Muslims and others who were killed, maimed, or displaced as a result of the illegal and unwarranted and post 9/11 invasions based on the lies of 9/11. So
Hmm.
that's our impetus for moving forward. People
Yes.
always say, "Oh, I've got a grudge on my I've got a grudge because of the way I was terminated." Yeah, that was the catalyst. It started me down this road to exploring 9/11 in depth many years ago. But really, so many people have been wronged by these lies that I personally feel compelled to speak out, as do others.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's one
Yeah.
one thing that I guess kind of goes overlooked that's had a repercussion from this was it created some major tension between Muslims and Americans, and there was a
Well,
point, where even your most loving spiritual person was being fooled by this, and we would become, I don't want to say racist, but we would get nervous for something that we were taught was an issue, and it's created some pretty bad feuds now between religions and countries and everything. And one day we're going to find out that it had little to do with what we were told it was about, and more possibly our government.
Hmm.
right. Well, Islam definitely got a black eye. You look at the exponential explosion in Islamophobia as a result of 9/11 and the way they portrayed Islam. I'll give an example of the atrocities. I live in Islamabad, Pakistan. I've lived here for 10 years. I met, fell in love with, and married a Pakistani 10 years ago, and I've lived here ever since. And people think I'm hiding over here, but I'm not. But
Oh, okay.
uh, anyhow, uh, over 70,000 Pakistanis have lost their lives through the war on terror. And I've seen firsthand on the news here the horrible things that have occurred that don't make the mainstream media back in the States. And it outrages me to see that. And the deaths in Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen,
Yes.
Libya, Syria. So I feel compelled to speak out.
So you kind of appreciate the new president then, who's compelled to stop all these wars and pulling troops out. Then in your
My
actually
hero.
in your neck of the woods.
Yes, he's my hero. He's doing
your-
everything I want to see happen in Afghanistan.
Yes.
The Prime Minister here, Imran Khan, is very much engaged. Pakistan is very much engaged in the peace talks going on in Doha. And if you've seen, they're 120. They spent 120 billion dollars, and this is kind of a poor country that they couldn't afford. They're relying on IMF loans. They're trying to wean themselves off of, but they want to see peace in the region. They want to see stability. This COVID has done a number on the economy on top of what they've already experienced here. So, yeah, President Trump's my hero, not just in that regard, but in a lot of ways. So,
Isn't he working on peace between Pakistan and India too?
well, I think that's a big mountain to climb.
Yeah.
They've been battling for so long over in that
Yeah.
mountain range.
Yeah, but
Right.
I've seen some miracles happen in the Trump administration that I never thought I would see in my life. You know, so
Right.
that it's 2020. Nothing's off the books at this point. Anything can happen.
Well, Pakistan's one of the few countries in the world that doesn't recognize Israel.
Yes.
And you see the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and now Tunisia joining in, recognizing, acknowledging Israel. And there's a close alliance between the United States, Israel, and India. And this is India and Pakistan, you have to understand, are arch rivals. And the only thing that's saving Pakistan right now is that they're the only nuclear Muslim country in the world. But there's a lot of pressure coming from Saudi Arabia on the prime minister here to recognize Israel. But that would be that would raise a lot of eyebrows in this country. I can guarantee you,
Wow.
amongst a lot of people. So it's a touchy situation.
Yes.
Well, that's kind of cool because I didn't expect to get some, boots on the ground conversation about Pakistan because it's fascinating to me. And Khan fascinated me when he visited Trump at the White House, and he seemed admired, for Trump.
Oh yeah, yeah. You talking about Imran Khan?
Yeah.
Oh
Khan.
yeah, I really admire the guy. I mean, this corruption is rampant over here, and he's got a war on corruption. And I read his autobiography when I first got over, and I told my wife, "Watch this guy; he's going to go someplace." And he was really handed a can of worms with the economy because the previous leaders of the country were so corrupt, and he was heavily in debt when this COVID hit. So. And inflation, I'm not saying it's running rampant, but prices have gone up on a lot of things. And people don't see it macrocosmically what this guy is doing for the country. And I pray that he gets a second term. He still has a couple of years left. So
Oh, good. Well,
if I could get back to our website and talk about that, I'd like
Sure.
to direct people's attention to 911pilot.org. If you're on the computer, which you have to be if you're watching this, you might want to pull that up, and I'll go over some of the pages on that. At the top of the website page, there's an About Dan Hanley tab that goes into a little detail about me and some of the things I just talked about. But if you scroll down, you'll see that I did two interviews, they're short interviews on Malaysian TV, talking about the uninterruptible autopilot. And you might say, well, why would Malaysians be interested in that? Well, if you look at Malaysian Air 370, the Boeing 777 that disappeared out over the Indian Ocean several years ago, we allege that the uninterruptible autopilot was employed because the aircraft, just like the 9/11 aircraft, veered wildly off course. They lost communication and the transponder before they disappeared out over the Indian Ocean. So also, on that same page, at the bottom of the page, there's a lengthy affidavit if you want to know more detail about my illegal grounding at United Airlines. That's there for your reading. The next thing on the top of the website is a Join Us page, and I point that out because we encourage people, both the general public and pilots alike, to join us, and we made it real simple. All we need is your name, email address, and there's a comments section down there. And if you're a pilot, we ask that you just list what airplanes you flew, and we'll get in touch with you, hopefully to interview you. And the other thing I'll just mention real quick before we get into the meat of the website is we've got a donate page, and no, I'm not a money grubber. We do have overhead expenses, such as our website development and our emailing system. And I'll mention that right now we're producing a full-length 9/11 documentary with a film producer in Lahore, Pakistan over here. And we're going over budget already on that, but it's going to involve exposing this uninterruptible autopilot system.
Nice.
So finally, to get to the website itself, there's a menu at the top of the page that if you click on it, it's a drop-down menu. And this is where we get into talking about some of the things we've already discussed here. We got the aircraft, and we show a picture of a Cessna 172 aircraft as compared to a Boeing 767 aircraft. Now, a Cessna 172 weighs about a ton, and a Boeing 767 weighs about 100 tons.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine, if you will, having had your driver's license for about a year and a half and hopping into a huge semi-tractor trailer you'd never driven before and getting it up to 500 miles an hour and being able to control it. So we point out that difference first before we go to the cockpit, which is the second next drop-down menu item there. You go to a Cessna 172 cockpit, the first thing you notice are the old round dialed instruments in front of the pilots, and there's only instruments on one side of the aircraft. And you've got one instrument for your engine, the RPM gauge, and you got a radio and a few knobs and switches there. And if you scroll down to a 767 cockpit, you'll see the stark differences between the two, because the instrument displays for the pilots themselves are CRT displays that has a myriad of flight data on there that they wouldn't have even been able to interpret. And the engine instruments, the same thing for the two engines. You got 4 instruments for each engine. But the most important, item on there, you see 2 black squares there on the center pedestal. Those are flight management computers, and that's the primary navigation system for the aircraft. And they've got 7 or 8 pages of information on there that those guys wouldn't have a clue. Even if they had the flight manual for the airplane, they wouldn't have a clue how to integrate the employment of the flight management computers with other switches and knobs up there on top. So that we point that out as far as cockpit differences. And then we go to the hijackers themselves, and we cover the 3 that crashed into buildings. We don't cover United 93 that crashed out in Pennsylvania, but you take the first hijacker, Mohammed Atta, was an Egyptian. He was 33 years old. None of them had ever flown a jet aircraft before in their lives, okay? And his was the first one. It was the American 11 that struck the North Tower. That was the first airplane that struck. And he was doing almost 500 miles per hour. And it was a straight-in approach. And people say, well, that's easy, just point and go. Well, at that closure rate, and the buildings may seem large, but they weren't. They aren't really, as far as the width of the building goes. At that closure rate and speed, had he been off heading by just a few degrees, he would have missed the building entirely. And yet, I'll use the semi-tractor trailer again. Imagine getting in one you've never driven before, get it up to 500 miles per hour, and try to drive it through a Jiffy Lube without scraping the side of the truck as you went through it. That's how accurate he would have had to have been. And he did it on his first attempt. The second hijacker we profile is Marwan El Shehhi. He was from the United Arab Emirates, and that plane was going the fastest of all of them. It was doing almost 600 miles an hour.
Wow.
And he approached from the south. And as he approached the building, it looked like he was going to miss it, but just 12 seconds out from the building, the aircraft rolled into a 30-degree angle of bank turn. And had the aircraft not commenced that turn with that precise angle of bank at that moment in time, he would have missed the building. Someone is computed by 800 feet. So that's a maneuver that even the most experienced pilots would find challenged to have performed. But finally, we go to the smoking gun of the hijackers, and that is Hani Hanjour. I mentioned the profile at the Pentagon he supposedly had flown. But on that page, we reiterate what the profile was. And if you scroll down to the bottom, we have notes there. And there's several quotes from newspapers around the country that at the time talked about how poor a student he was. He came here in the mid 90s and went back to Saudi Arabia. He did some training in the States and then went back to Saudi Arabia and came back about 9 months prior to 9/11. And when he tried to re-enroll into the flight school he had attended previously, they wouldn't even take him back because they said that he was such a poor student they didn't want to waste their resources on him.
Wow.
You can see several other articles that are quoted there at the bottom of that page, but the most glaring one of all is 1 month prior to 9/11. Hani Hanjour goes to the Freeway Airport in Maryland to rent a single-engine Cessna 172, and they wouldn't rent it to him because he couldn't handle the airplane.
Wow.
And yet a month later, he supposedly flew this maneuver in a Boeing 757. So those are the three hijackers, and we're trying to.
Froze.
Oh, you froze? Okay.
Wow. I mean,
We got you back?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
you froze for a second.
Oh, okay. It's saying my internet connection's unstable, but if I
That
lose
same exact thing happened last night right when we got into the serious topics.
yeah.
I'm telling you, somebody's keeping the truth away one way or the other.
Trying to.
I was going to ask you a question about this. Now, okay, a lot of people that recognized immediately that there was something not right about this. And obviously, many people had many different interpretations of how it could have went down. We heard information from the people that were on the ground there that they did not see airplanes in the sky. Later on, we received video from, because remember, this was at a time where we had these, but not everybody had cell phones.
Right.
So, but there was some footage that popped up years later that showed the explosion minus an airplane. I started wondering, well, how could this have been? Obviously we saw video footage. Well, as a filmmaker, I've got stuff in my home computer that I can make realistic looking jets that look not movie made. And
Right.
then I started looking into holograms. And I'm starting to see all of these things pop up around the world where people, right in front of them, you see dolphins swimming on a court or a basketball court, and it looks just as real as can be. Is it possible that something like that could have gone just to fool the people into thinking that it was actual aircraft? Because we needed an excuse. If it had just blown up and fallen down, everybody would have been asking questions. You throw an airplane into it, and all of a sudden you've given people a reason, and less people ask questions. Is that a possibility?
Well, if you've got a chat room, they're probably saying this idiot still believes there's airplanes because I'm always attacked. And I just want to point out, we're attacking the hijackers.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying that they weren't experienced.
Yes.
We're attacking the official story. And we're not saying what happened on 9/11, but what could not have happened. That is, the hijackers couldn't have flown the airplanes. But I've seen all the footage that you're talking about. And yes, I believe that it was pre-recorded
Yes.
and put up there for public consumption. I really don't get into the debate about the planes, no planes theories anymore because I've heard it all, and we have a very narrow focus in our organization, and that is attacking the hijackers. But
Yes.
now that you brought that up, though, I will mention, and I don't have it on the website, but there were 4 independent photos taken of United 175, the airplane that struck the South Tower. One of them was by CNN, and 3 of them were by 3 other independent photographers. On all 4 photos, it shows a long cylindrical pod on the bottom of the fuselage of the aircraft. Well, if you look at the bottom of the fuselage of a Boeing 767, it doesn't have that pod.
Yes.
So if those photos are legitimate, that wasn't United 175 that struck the
Yes.
South Tower.
Yes.
So there's an author called Rebecca Roth who's published 3 books, a series called Methodical Illusion, Methodical Deception, and Methodical Conclusion. And in her book, she hypothesizes that there was an airborne swap of aircraft over Stewart Air Force Base using the uninterruptible autopilot. And those 2 aircraft that hit the tower were replaced by aircraft that were remotely controlled. And the planes with passengers were taken to a New England airport, forced to make phone calls and stuff. So that I haven't read her books. I watched some of her YouTube videos, but that's one of the theories out there floating around that that wasn't United 175 that hit the South Tower. Now, I'll jump over real quick to a guy named Dobbs Akheim. He was a dual U.S. Israeli citizen that served in government in some capacity since the Reagan era. Well, prior to 9/11, he was the CEO of a company called System Planning Corporation that developed a system called the Flight Termination System that Rebecca Roth talks a lot about in her book. But this system was designed to remotely take control of an airborne vehicle and guide it wherever it wanted to. So he's been called the mastermind of 9/11. And you might want to DOVCAKHEIM. You might want to do research because coincidentally, just 4 months prior to 9/11, Bush appointed him as comptroller to the Pentagon. And if you recall, one day prior to 9/11, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld announced that $2.3 trillion went missing from the Pentagon budget. And guess where American 77 hid? The Office of Naval Intelligence that housed the budget analyst office that was investigating the missing $2.3 trillion.
Yes, sir.
So they had over 30 analysts murdered out of the 50 that worked there, and the records were destroyed. So was that a coincidence? We think not. So.
Yeah.
I remember.
Just to cover real quick the other theory, there's the other theory too that what hit the Pentagon wasn't officially a plane; it was a missile painted like a plane, had little wings, painted, looked like a plane, but it was an actual missile that flew that low to the ground to impact because there was no no fuselage, no tail, no wings, no nothing from the plane.
I remember watching them clean up that mess, and they weren't bringing out gigantic airplane pieces. You saw a video that was from a convenience store located across the street, and there was a little bench so you could have a comparison. There's no matter what your perspective is, you're not going to hide a Boeing airplane behind a bench. And you can see this little missile fly through, and there was a point where it disappeared behind this bench, which is obviously going to be way smaller than a Boeing airplane. Then you go in and you see the mess that it created, and I'm looking at wooden chairs that are smoking. I'm watching paper fly all over the place, but yet somehow it literally melts through steel. That makes zero sense. I don't, even if you're not an engineer, an architect, if you can burn steel, your papers and your wood's going to be incinerated.
Well, I want to point out, most people don't realize this as well, but the advanced navigation system on today's modern commercial jet aircraft derived from cruise missile technology. It's extremely accurate. If you can get the you could get the latitude, longitude to a second of a target. That's where the airplane's going, and this is demonstrated when in inclement weather, when the visibility gets down below 1,200 feet, that the pilot can see down the runway. They're required to make an auto landing by federal regulations. Okay, and I've done many of them, and you'll see this airplane latch onto what they call the localizing glide slope signal. It'll fly precisely down the flight path to the runway, touching down in the center line of the runway, and track down the center line, and you actually have to disengage the autopilot to take control of the aircraft. So when people say it was a cruise missile, well, I've heard 4 different theories. The cruise missile, that it was American 77, that it was a droned airplane, and that there was a flyover where they dropped explosives and no airplane hit the building. So once again, we don't go there. We're just attacking honey hunter
Yes.
Right.
organization. So
Yeah, it would be very hard for any inexperienced pilot to get a plane down that low and fly
Yeah.
straight in that fast.
This was feet off the
Especially-
ground.
exactly, especially without hitting the surface.
yeah,
I mean-
without hitting cars or poles or anything else. You just
Right.
hit a building
Yeah.
straight on.
And I've seen some
Well,
military pilots do some pretty amazing things, but a jet is like a quarter the size of a Boeing. I mean,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
I don't know.
I know there's
Let me
so many
get in.
questions.
It's hindsight's 2020. I mean, I wish I would have been as awake, the day I was watching that and caught all that. It took me years to catch on that everything you're saying or that we're talking about now.
Well, let me talk about remote control aircraft. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
how
that would
much
be great.
time we
Yes.
have here.
Oh, you got time.
Oh yes.
Okay. Well, most people will say you're crazy. You can't remotely guide a large commercial jet aircraft. Okay. Well, I could point out that in 1962, technology was around to develop the SR-71.
Yes, sir.
In 69, they supposedly put men on the moon. You got a space station up there right now. So technology has advanced phenomenally over the last many decades. But getting back to our remote control page on the website, it may come as a surprise to you that it existed over 75 years ago, when in 1944, the U.S. military launched Operation Aphrodite in Europe. And what they did was gutted out the B-24 bombers, twin-engine bombers, to lighten the weight of the aircraft. And they loaded it up with 30,000 pounds of Torpex, which is a highly incendiary compound. And the pilots were required to make the takeoff. But once they got in the air, they bailed out of the aircraft, and the aircraft was remotely guided at targets in Europe. Now, this is your first example of drone weapons using airplanes, and that was over 75 years ago. And on the website, we have a short video there, and we point out that Joe Kennedy, JFK's older brother, was killed on one of these top secret missions when the airplane blew up due to a malfunction before he could bail out of the airplane. And there's a 5-minute film clip there that shows that. Now, we're only citing 2 examples here, but there are many that we could cite regarding a remote-controlled aircraft. But if you jump ahead 4 decades to 1984, the Federal Aviation Administration and NASA conducted a joint crash test experiment in a remote location using a large 4-engine Boeing 720 commercial jet aircraft that didn't have passengers or crew on board. They loaded it with crash dummies. And what they wanted to do was test crew and passengers' survivability in the event of a crash landing. Now, they took this large aircraft, remotely controlled it to make a takeoff, fly around the pattern several times, making an auto landing before they intentionally crash landed the aircraft. And we got a short film clip on there just showing the final approach in there where the airplane crashed. They crashed the airplane intentionally. So That was in 1984. If you jump ahead to the mid 90s, now imagine the technology advancements with the advent of the computer age from 1944 to present. And you jump ahead to the mid 90s, a system was developed that I mentioned before called this uninterruptible autopilot that allows a remote source to take control of the aircraft. And proof is given that the system exists. You can go on the internet and Google uninterruptible autopilot or Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot. And the first thing that pops up is a Wikipedia article acknowledging the existence of this system. But it's misleading because they say Boeing didn't patent it until 2006. That's true, they didn't. We have the patent history on this system. But we have irrefutable proof that it was developed in the mid 90s. And we've got a 45-minute interview of an avionics technician there who in 1996, 97 actually worked on this system. So we know it existed prior to 9/11. And our organization, the search, said it was in fact used. And if you scroll down below that video, we got several supporting videos. A real good one by James Corbett on there that talks about this system and its existence. So finally, on the website, we've got a pilot interviews page. And if you go to that, excuse me again, if you go to that, you will see 6 interviews of many that we've done of pilots where we talk to them about their flight credentials, how many hours they have, how many airplanes they've flown. And then we go into describing the profiles, and they attest on these videos. They're short, they're only 10 to 15 minutes long, that they couldn't have flown the profiles. And they give the reason why these hijackers couldn't have flown it either. But at the end of this, we say, you be the judge. You read all this information, go there, watch all the videos, and make your own determination. Was it these poorly trained and inexperienced alleged Muslim hijackers at the controls of the aircraft, or was it a remote source? And if you disagree with those two, then come forward with an explanation as to how 3 of the 4 airplanes hit targets that day.
Yes.
Yeah, with amazing ability that 3 pilots trained in, Cessnas could never have maneuvered a plane to do.
No.
Right.
At that rate of speed, too, and that big of a plane.
Right. Well, talking about whistleblowing, I've been doing it for a long time. I was involved with another case from 2006 to 2007, 11, I mean, that involved, I'll just bluntly say it, there were mobbed up judges in Chicago that presided over the United Airlines post 9/11 bankruptcy, and we have proof that they were, and they maintained a bribery fund for other judges there. And I was working with a millionaire from Chicago whose company was stolen out from under him in bankruptcy by these same judges. And I discovered over a 5-year period just how corrupt the whole system is.
Yes.
I went to the FBI with an external hard drive device that had all this information on it. They wouldn't even accept it. So I pretty much lost all faith and trust in the U.S. government, and in particular the mainstream media during that time frame. But during that time frame, I was working with the Government Accountability Project and the National Whistleblower Center, which is the 2 largest whistleblower advocacy groups in the world. And they told me late in the ball game, get this statistic. They say if you're a U.S. federal whistleblower, you stand less than a 2% probability of winning your case in the United States, less than 2%. So you'd stand better odds playing the tables in Las Vegas and go being a whistleblower and expect any level of success. Today's whistleblower laws aren't worth the paper they're written on.
No.
They don't allow for jury trials with the discovery phase. You go before an administrative law judge. And I'll point out that the intelligence services have no whistleblower protection. It's why Edward Snowden ran off to Russia with the goods, because he knew from previous NSA whistleblowers that he wouldn't stand a chance. And I always give this example of a guy named Russell Tice. Have either one of you heard of him before?
No.
Russell Tice was a 20-year, I'm getting off 9/11 a bit, but I want to point out what happened to whistleblowers in the United States. Russell Tice was a 20-year military civil intelligence officer who was working at the NSA. And while there, he discovered, this is before Edward Snowden and Bill Binney, if you know who he was, okay? Uh, he discovered that not only were they wiretapping civilians, but they were wiretapping senators, judges, military officers, et cetera, et cetera. So he leaked the story to the New York Times, and the NSA found out that it was him. So Russell ran before Congress and testified, but he couldn't divulge specifics because of the sensitivity of the issues, and he didn't have hard copies to back up his allegations. So the NSA pulled him back and put him in charge of the NSA motor pool until they could find a psychiatrist who could come up with a diagnosis that would enable them to pull his security clearance, which they did, and they fired him. And that is, I first learned about this on Rachel Maddow. I was listening to this guy talk about a psychiatric evaluation and what they did. They took the only piece of paper he needed to work for the NSA. And I said, and I was actually in touch with Russell several years ago via email, and we exchanged our stories. So that's why Snowden ran off to Russia. That's why he's still there. These whistleblower laws don't protect you at all.
Nope.
But
No.
I always encourage people to speak out anyhow, but just don't plan on the normal system to work for you.
I mean, you got to keep integrity and tell the truth, and they don't make it easy on you at this point. And, you know, we're hopefully watching a bit of change to where, you know, here in the future, you know, people won't be afraid to come out because, you know, I don't know, I'm sure you're keeping tabs on what's happening over in our country right now with this election.
Oh, yeah.
And all these people, I'm talking brave, everyday, average citizens that are coming out and telling you what they saw at these the polling areas, and they're being threatened. Their houses are being robbed. They're some of them, according to General Flynn, have ended up in the hospital. I mean, this is where we're at right now, you know. And you think, you know, we were under the idea that our government protected people that were honest, coming out and trying to do the right thing, but we're finding out that that's not the case, and it's looking like, you know, Trump is a very unique item in the government right now.
Right, I agree. That's a tragedy, and it was for me too. I thought I had laws and regulations to protect me, but more importantly, institutions of government that would support me. And when you step out in front of that tank and you find out you have neither, it's a pretty lonely feeling.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
It's a pretty lonely feeling.
Before we go to Q&A, because maybe this will alleviate some questions, can you touch on the official 9/11 story, Osama bin Laden, and the government cover-up?
Sure. Well, if you go back over the story, I always think about the fact that a whole new generation has been born since 9/11. And all they've been taught is what they learned in school. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the official story, this skinny man living on dialysis, suffering from kidney failure in a cave somewhere in the mountainous regions of Afghanistan, armed with a laptop and a satellite phone, somehow commanded 19 angry Muslim extremists armed with box cutters who had never flown a commercial jet aircraft in their life to evade the most sophisticated air defense system in the world for over an hour before crashing three of the aircraft into buildings. The story on its face is ludicrous.
Yes.
And yet, because of the mainstream media, because of the government perpetuation, this story has lingered for over 19 years now. And talking about COVID, and I don't know where you guys stand on this, but I say I've tweeted it before and I get a lot of positive responses on it. But the same mainstream media that has perpetuated the lies of 9/11 for 19 years is the same media that's creating all this hype on an hourly basis Unfortunately, I only get CNN and BBC over here.
Oh man, so
Right.
you're
Only
so you're
English
basically
TV.
getting the worst of the worst right now.
Well, I don't rely on that. I go to them. My wife says, "Why do you turn them on? You just get angry every time you watch them." I go, "I want to see what kind of garbage they're spewing out there." But there's definitely been a government cover up. I'm
Yep.
experiencing firsthand the stonewall you get from the government with the FAA that I'm dealing with right now. The lawyers committee's getting it right now. So they're hell bent on keeping this story from going public, and they're going to get the full support of the media doing it. I would never go on a U.S. mainstream media TV program because I know how they spend things and attack people
Yes,
and
they
they
do.
make me look like an idiot. So I thank you two guys for programs such as this. I wish there was a million of them out there. Uh, I look forward to going on and talking about it, talking about this stuff.
Or
No, we're happy you're here.
oh yeah.
In fact, there's a bunch of questions too. But the other thing that stood out to me most too, well, two things. The only thing that really caught on to that I thought was odd was that the Osama bin Laden family was flown out of Florida shortly after all this had happened for
Right,
their protection, which seemed odd. The other
right,
was uh, the other tragedy to me is what was done to America was Chertoff's Patriot Act.
right.
Bush and Chertoff and all them had imposed on America.
That had, and that was miraculously published this several hundred pages of the Patriot Act shortly after 9/11. So they had to have had it in the printers, okay? And I
Yeah,
don't envy you guys because I feel like you're living in a police state because with the post 9/11 NSA wiretap, the Patriot Act, and the Homeland Security and their ability to come in and kick down doors, you're living in a police state,
Yep.
and it was
yep.
all evolved from the lies of 9/11. So
You're right.
I I'd like to point out on the 9/11 commission, they weren't even going to have one. It wasn't until the next of kin complained to Bush, and it wasn't established till November 2002. People don't realize that it was not a criminal. The 9/11 investigation commission did not constitute a criminal investigation. There's never been a criminal investigation into the worst crime ever committed on American
Yes, sir.
soil in its history. All forensic evidence, such as the steel that Michael Chertoff, who's a dual U.S. Israeli Zionist citizen, had shipped off to China without any forensic evidence being taken. And also, not one single pilot was permitted to testify before the 9/11 Commission as to the absurdity of this story that these hijackers flew the airplane. They started off with the assumption we already know who did it, bin Laden. We already have the 19 hijackers named, and people bought into the story. So we're trying, and I'm not overly optimistic that we're going to be successful just
Hmm.
because of how corrupt the system is. But we're going to run the full gamut and try to do it anyhow.
I'm gonna
I
be
th-
positive for you.
yeah,
I'm gonna
me
Oh,
too.
say
really?
Because
we're good. Like I said,
under,
once yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I was just gonna go ahead.
I was gonna say that Trump is a game
Exa-
changer. He is an
Yep.
absolute game changer. He
Yeah,
one thing about Trump that we've come to notice over time is that he likes to plant little seeds and then he'll walk away from a subject. Right at the
Mhm.
very beginning, he was talking about 9/11. He was talking about John F. Kennedy assassination stuff, and then he walks away from it. What he's doing is he plants these seeds, and he always comes back to a topic. But he wants you to remember that he talked about it, so it's not fresh when it comes back out. And
right,
I am certain once we get this mess cleaned up, because Patriots are going to clean up this mess if Trump can't. And it's going to be
right,
bloody and nasty, but like I said, is no one is going to lose their freedom, and we've all come to the point where we realize that we've been deceived and duped. I think sending our kids
right.
to school that our government is sponsoring is probably the worst thing that we've ever done because you said it perfect. New generation was born after 9/11 and they only know what they're taught in school.
Yeah.
Right, exactly,
And the other thing
exactly.
is, he's called it out from the beginning. Trump knew from day one
Yes.
that planes didn't bring down these
Mm-hmm.
buildings, and also his closest ally, his closest friend, just happens to be the mayor that was during that period, Rudy Giuliani. And if
Right.
any two people in this world know exactly what happened, it's those two.
Right.
And if
Right.
they're willing to bring it out.
Yeah, Trump literally, I'm going to say, I mean, before the smoke had even cleared, literally said, I do this for a living. This isn't possible.
Yep.
He said, he goes, I know how
Right.
they build these buildings. I do it every day. So, and the great thing is, and I encourage all of our viewers, if you have not, go to Donald Trump's Twitter and go back to 2009, 2010, 2011. He has literally been telling you everything that we're looking at right now. He's always known.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're
So
at the
anyhow-
hour. Oh,
Okay,
you got
go
something you
ahead.
want to add?
No, I was just going to mention I'm real active on social media. I got thrown off Facebook permanently for security reasons.
That's
for
a badge
talking
of
about
honor.
Yeah.
uninterruptible autopilot, but they still let me on Twitter. I'm on there at Dan Hanley 4 if you want to follow me. I'm on LinkedIn at Captain Dan Hanley. Yeah, that's about all I wanted to add in. And thanks again for letting me talk here.
Oh, well, no problem. Well, you got more time, right, to answer some
Oh, yeah,
questions?
sure.
Good, because we got questions rolling in. Duncan, if
Yeah,
you
I've
want to
got.
go to Q&A.
Yeah, we'll go to Q&A now, guys. If you haven't gotten questions in, go and get them in right now. And I want to start off with one quick question. And this isn't necessarily about 9/11, but it is about airplanes, and I think a lot of people are curious. So, every time I've ever been on an airplane, one of the first things they say before they get ready to leave is you need to turn off all personal items, including phones, laptops, and tablets. Now, with the sophistication of technology today and aircraft, is this really just a pet peeve of pilots, or does my phone really affect the gadgets that are in the cockpit of an airplane?
Well, I personally always thought it was ridiculous, and I've never had them present me with information to show where it would interfere. But talking about cell phones, they weren't operable at altitude on 9/11.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where those cell phones came from, cell phone calls came from, I don't know.
Wow, that's really. I'm glad that you just said that, because I think a
'Cause
lot of us
that's-
had that question because they got
In
the phone call.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
But did that happen? Did that plane just happen to get low enough to where they were making some calls before it
I don't know.
crashed?
Well, some believe there wasn't even an airplane there, but I don't
Yeah.
know at what altitude the phone call was made.
Right.
So I can't answer that question.
So before I got one question like Duncan, this one happened in the last couple of years. The two plane crashes, 737 Maxes. Now some say those weren't just mysteriously crashed. Some say they were crashed on purpose, or some say there weren't really crashes. Do you have any thoughts on what brought those down, or did they really happen?
I have limited knowledge of the system on the airplane, but as I understand it, if the pilots would pitch up too high where they'd reach what is called a critical angle of attack, where the airplane was going to stall, the airplane had the capability of pushing the nose open. And if the pilot tried to fight the system, it would push harder. And what essentially happened was they reached that critical angle of attack. The airplane nosed over, they pulled back, which would be a normal response that you'd want to do, and they couldn't override the system, and it drove them into the ground. That's all I understand about the system, and I don't really know that much more about the crashes. But
Yeah.
you can go to the there's a guy named Christopher Bolin. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a 9/11 truther that's written 2 books on 9/11, and he has an excellent interview by Richie Allen, where he talked about the Russian Metrojet that crashed in the Sinai. And if you listen to, he got the flight data recorder information and analyzed it. And if you listen to the information on that interview, I'm convinced that the uninterruptible autopilot was employed. That they necessarily brought down the Russian jet because of what was going on in Syria at the time, with Putin supporting Assad. So I'm in touch with an author who's written a 450-page book he sent me. He's in New Zealand, uh, named Declan Turing, and he's going to get this book published, but it's on Malaysia Air 370 and the other Malaysian air flight over the Ukraine. And he talks in depth about the uninterruptible autopilot system. So the system's out there, or at least it was,
All right.
and we know what it can do.
You got a question, Duncan?
Yes, I do. We've got this is from Drogan. He goes, "Was there any CCTV footage of the passengers boarding the airplanes?"
No, there is no video footage of any of the hijackers boarding the aircraft.
Okay.
There's one video of one of the hijackers passing through security, but I don't know what time that video was taken. As a matter of fact, a United flight attendant messaged me on Twitter the other day and said, "Dan, I went down to Newark Flight Operations and they had the manifest for all 4 of the flights listed on the wall, and there wasn't one Arab sounding name on the list." Well, I've heard that they edited the manifest later, months later, to include names, but I can't confirm that. But no, there was no TV recording of the hijackers boarding the aircraft. I personally believe there were some hijackers on, but that they were passed. Maybe they were led to believe they were going to hijack an airplane. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I believe there were hijackers on the airplane. They were just passed.
Yep.
Yeah, because basically, there's a couple questions in here regarding this. Is that how in the heck did these passengers or hijackers get on board, not get subdued before they got into the cockpit, and then even after they got in the cockpit, they were never subdued by just only having box knives?
Right. That part of the story bewilders me as well. I can't answer any more than that on that question. I know that Chick Burlingame, the captain on American 77 that hit the Pentagon, was supposed to be a huge guy. They say there's not a snowball's chance in hell he would have allowed this skinny hijacker with a box cutter to take the airplane away from him. So.
Christy Robinson wants to know, what about the black boxes? Were any of them ever recovered in the 3 buildings?
Yes,
Pentagon and the 2 towers?
Are you familiar with David Chandler?
No.
He founded Scientists for 9/11 Truth, and him and his cohort had me on share screen on Skype for 2 hours one night, showing me flight data recorded from American 77. And it was damaged, but there was a gentleman in New Zealand that was able to recover information that otherwise wouldn't have been out there. And I sat there looking at this information, and it's highly accurate, which led me to believe it was American 77 that hit the Pentagon, even though there were no skid marks in the ground, there were no airplane parts, seats, passengers, etc. But they showed me another slide that showed the distribution of the DNA inside the Pentagon and claimed that they matched the passengers that were on the airplane. So they're involved with Colorado for 9/11 Truth. So yes, there were black. That's one black box that I've been told was recovered.
Okay.
But
and that black box that was supposedly from a plane that crashed in Pennsylvania, that was recovered. Supposedly.
Yeah, I heard that as well. Yeah.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, one guy I was working with is a walking, talking encyclopedia of knowledge that has gotten so much information from the Freedom of Information Act, told me that he had data that a forensic pathologist at the Pennsylvania crash site acknowledged that it matched some of the passengers on board the airplane. Well, the debris was scattered 8 miles.
Yeah.
And I know they're claiming it all went into a single hole and disappeared, inverted.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That's why I don't touch that airplane, because I personally don't have an idea what it actually was. Was it shot down? Was it blown up in the sky? Was it even there? So
Yeah. We've got a question here from Justin Tackett. He says, "Is there military equipment logs that show missing or no longer in commission aircraft at the time of 9/11?"
I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
I wish I could answer the answer, but I'm not aware of it.
It's a good question. It was something that crossed my mind too, because you figured that they'd notice if an aircraft was missing.
Right.
You know, but if it was something that was decommissioned that barely ran, that's all you would need to create an illusion, basically.
Let me just throw in a side story here on a whistleblower. I just thought about Philip Marshall. I mentioned him earlier, okay? He was a Boeing 767 captain, United Airlines, and had written 2 books on 9/11 and was about to publish his 3rd book. When they found him, the neighbors found his family dog and 2 kids shot to death and him with a bullet in the head. And they called it a murder-suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Boy, I've seen a lot of that.
Yeah. Especially if they knew the Clintons.
That's what I was about to say. Especially if they knew
Right.
the Clintons.
Michelle M wants to know, are you safe there in Pakistan?
I always get asked that. Yes, I feel like I'm safe, although my wife tells me it's a poor country and it will only take about $50 to get me killed over here.
That's
And
a better rate
CIA,
than New York these days.
CIA, Mossad, MI6, RAW,
Mhm.
you name it, is running rampant over here. So I always say I'm not a threat to them because I'm still alive. So
Yes.
I feel like I'm safe, but I will point this out that last May, my wife and I were planning a trip back to the States, and the very day I made my reservation on Qatar Airways through Doha to Atlanta, the FBI called my ex-wife in Washington, wanted to know everything about my trips. How could they even know I booked the reservation? But they did. So anyhow, I called the FBI in Washington and said, what's up? And they wouldn't tell me anything. So I told my wife, anticipate something happening when we get to the States. And sure enough, when we got into the immigration hall, she went over to the foreigner's passport line. I went to the U.S. And a few minutes later, a man and a woman escorts my wife over to me. I was in the cordoned off area. And they said, Mr. Hanley, they whip out their badges. One was FBI, the other was TSA. And they said, you have time for some questions? I said, sure. So when we went up to a desk that didn't have a line, they tell the immigration officer, stamp their passports, and he gets on his computer and he looked up the FBI agent and said, you know, this guy's red, don't you? Well, I thought, I don't know what red means, but it didn't sound good. I didn't ask him, right? So they took us in a room and asked me where I was going to be, what I was doing in the States. They wanted contact numbers. And I thought that was the end of it. But a month later, we're leaving the States and we just came through security and dumped out into a busy concourse. And up walks another FBI TSA agent. They knew me by, they identified me by photos, I guess, knew what flight I was going on. They asked me if I could go into a room and talk. They brought me in there for a half hour and they said to me, first of all, we want to tell you, thank you for your 10 years of military service. And we respect your First Amendment freedom of speech rights, but have you ever been threatened? And I said, no, why should I be? And my wife buries her head in her lap and she goes, he posts on Facebook. He's harmless, right? Well, they knew everything about me. They knew my military record, what I'd posted on Facebook groups and everything. So I know that the U.S. government knows I'm living in Islamabad and I'm very vocal. And when I email the FAA, I've got a ton of government offices such as the Attorney General, FBI, you name it, that I copy on the email. So I let everybody in government know exactly what I'm saying or doing, and they'll get a link to this program when we're done here. When you send
You know
it
what?
to
They probably already have the link.
Yes.
and they're probably listening to us right now.
Because I guarantee you there's some people out there that know where we are as well. And
Yeah.
I didn't think we were a threat, but apparently the truth in itself is a threat these days. So
Yeah.
Couple questions about Let's Roll, the term Let's Roll from Flight 93.
Yeah. That was Todd Beamer.
Was that
And-
propaganda? Was that real? Was it Uh,
Oh, well, again, was it on the cell phone? The phones in the back of the seat supposedly was. But if it was from a cell phone, they say that cell phone calls couldn't have been made. But yeah, I believe it's a big propaganda, making a hero out of the guy and the passengers on board the airplane. Yeah, it outraged anyone that heard it. That they tried to attack, and the plane goes inverted and goes crashes into a field. So it had just like the film United '93 that came out after 9/11.
yeah.
And you look at,
Yes.
I don't know if you saw it, but if you look at how it portrayed the Muslims going through their prayer rituals before
Hmm.
and washing their hands and everything else, to me it was one big propaganda
Oh,
film
yes.
coming out of a Zionist owned and controlled Hollywood.
Yep.
Yeah.
As a person who has been through film school and have been working in film for years, I can tell you that most movies are propaganda films, whether you think it is or not. It's a propaganda of some sort,
Yeah,
and they go
yeah,
overboard when it comes to things like this, where they're trying to convince people of a certain story.
right.
I've got a question here from Dwayne Horsefeathers. One thing that I always say is that there's nothing more dangerous in this world than a man or a woman who knows that they're about to lose everything. So when these people were on some of these air flights, he wants to know, with all due respect to the people that lost their lives, how did they keep them from trying to stop it? Were they gassed or something like that? Um, if you know that they're going to be taking a plane down, I can't imagine that there had to have been at least 3 or 4 men or women on there that would have jumped out of their seats and tried to do something.
Well, you figure there's what 50 people on the airplane, and you got 3 or 4 hijackers in the back with box cutters, and you see where they're heading, especially when you got close to New York City. I can't imagine them not trying to overpower, but you got to remember all communication, all the radios were shut off. The transponder, which is the device used to by air traffic control to identify an aircraft, was switched off. They normally put 7700 in these little windows on the device to indicate that they were having an emergency. None of that happened.
Yeah.
So if there was a big wrestling match in the back of the airplane, no one will ever know because they never recovered any of the cockpit voice recordings.
Yeah, yeah, and you got to remember too is that was a time where, you know, the wealthy had a phone with a camera in it, and nobody else did. Today we take that for granted because everyone's always got a recording device. Not back
Right.
in that time; it was a little bit easier to hide things.
Yeah.
Got a question. So, in your thoughts, uh, everything that you're discussing, we went to an unnecessary war. Um,
Yes.
Christy Robinson wants to know. Do you,
All of them
do
were
you,
unnecessary. They were all based on the lies of 9/11. You look at Afghanistan, for example. What was the real reason we went in there? Well, they claim it was to chase down Osama bin Laden and bring him back dead or alive. Okay, but you look, the reality was it was to thwart a Russian and Chinese expansion in South Asia, the poppy fields. There was a gas pipeline called the Tapi Pipeline, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. They wanted control of. There's over $3 trillion in lithium and other precious metals and ores in the ground that they wanted control of, and they wanted to surround Iran. To me, those are the real reasons that we went in there. And
yep,
then you look at Iraq, they lied and they admitted it. Weapons
yep,
of mass destruction. And
yep,
few people remember that they mentioned as an aside that there were elements of Al Qaeda operating in the country. Well, what did they say afterwards? Well, he was a bad man. We had to get rid of him. He destabilized the whole region. But the reality to me is 9/11 was planned and executed by Zionist members of the governments of Israel and the United States and others as a plan to as an excuse to go into the Middle East and South Asia and either topple or totally destabilize governments there.
yep. And so the Zionists control the media too,
Yes.
most of the media.
Well, if you look at APAC, if I don't know if listeners are familiar with that, but that's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It should be called Political Action Committee, but it's one of the biggest and most powerful lobbies in the United States, and it reaches all the way down to the state and local level. And you dare not attack Israel if you're a politician, or
Yep.
you're doomed. And three examples are Cynthia McKinney, former congresswoman who spoke out, Jim Traficant, another who died a mysterious death, spoke out about it, and Ilhan Omar has spoken out about it, where they approach you after you get in office and want you to sign an oath of loyalty to Israel that you'll support them and defend them. And then if you get into the media, in 1983, there were over 50 independent news media outlets in the United States, and today there's only 6 media conglomerates that control 96% of the news you see on TV or read in the print media. In that same year, 1983, Israel launched what was called the Hasbara Project, Hasbara Project, and its purpose and goal was to infiltrate U.S. media to force it to cast a favorable light on Israel. And if you look at the management structure of these 6 major media conglomerates, that's exactly what they've been successful in doing, and that is to insert or infiltrate at all levels, particularly the higher levels of management of these conglomerates to control. Because you never hear anything. I have nothing against Israelis. I have nothing against Jews. I'm not an anti-Semite. There's a broad difference between that and anti-Zionism. Okay, and I just know, based on what I've read, that Israel has such a stranglehold on every level and branch of government, and the media, and business, and banking, and high tech, that people are just aren't aware.
Yeah.
They watch CNN and Fox and take it at face value.
Yeah. We're at interesting times now because, just like we look at other countries and we can separate, we see what a country is doing, but we can't tell who in that country is doing something. And it's the same thing, you've got you've got bad people in every country and good people in every country. And it's just like today when the Europeans looking back over at what's going on in America, many of them can't separate the fact that there is a Trump government and a deep state government. So they just see America issues. And that's one thing that we have to realize, because you said it perfect. The moment that you say something bad about people, they want to jump into that, throw the anti-Semitism card out there. And it's like, no. This has nothing to do with Jewish people as a whole. This has to do with that bad sept of people like the George Soroses that are out there creating issues right now in this world. And so I mean, it's kind of this whole world has been created to be a big illusion to confuse all of your average common people.
Most people aren't aware what Zionism is. Mm-hmm. It's a political ideology. If people aren't familiar with the Greater Israel Project, which Israel claims, according to biblical prophecy, the promised land extends from the Euphrates River to the Nile River. And if you look at the maps of that and the countries that overlays and the invasions that occurred after 9/11, it all makes sense then. But I've been accused of being an anti-Semite, and you got people like Chuck Schumer who are trying to fuse the two together and say you can't badmouth Israel, you cannot badmouth Zionism. It's all anti-Semitic, and it's hard. It's garbage.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people in media and politics have dual citizenship with Israel.
I was going to say that the majority of them actually. How many? We looked at the list of Democrats specifically, and it was like easily 80% of Democrats have dual citizenship. Yeah. It seemed like.
Yeah. People just don't realize.
Oh yeah, and many people here didn't even know what AIPAC was until recently, and that is because of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar that have brought that to the attention of people, because they're always talking against it.
I'm starting to think that they're plants.
Yeah.
Chris Stradler, just real quick, would like you to make a comment on the extreme confusion and disorganization with the air traffic control and NORAD during 9/11.
Okay. Well, you know, there were numerous exercises going on up in New England that day, and one of them was even simulating the hijacking of an aircraft. So I know there was a big confusion factor thrown in there, but you look at NORAD, who practices these exercises daily on how to handle a hijacked aircraft, and the delayed response they had. Bill McConnell, that I mentioned before, belonged to the guard unit that launched the F-16s out of Langley, 3 of them. And they got inbound towards Washington, D.C., and they were turned out over the Atlantic for several miles. They might have intercepted American 77 coming into the Pentagon had that not occurred. But yeah, there was definitely confusion. I should mention I'm also co-authored a book about 9/11. It's called Grounded, a true story of a 9/11 pilot whistleblower. But my co-author goes into great detail in the book about that. I was just reading it this morning about who was in charge at NORAD and the FAA, and how they were conveniently planted in there before 9/11.
Yeah.
In fact, you just mentioned Field McConnell, and a lot of people probably recognize that name within our movement, really. Patriot movement. His name is common.
Yes.
Yeah, I've known him since 2006. He's a Christian man. He's the only man I know. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and has 3 sets of wings, Army, Navy, and Air Force. Well, he came out of the academy with Navy wings after going through Pensacola and flew F-4s in the Marine Corps, but he also flew in the Air National Guard, and I can't think of the other. But anyhow, he's right now down in Broward County on house arrest because he allegedly violated a court order. It's a long story. Anybody that knows Field and has been following him is familiar with the case, but he's under house arrest. He was exposing child trafficking and pedophilia in Broward County.
Yep.
And they arrested him, had him extradited to Florida from Wisconsin, and he's awaiting trial there on 1 felony count. And if they find him guilty, he'll do 3 to 5 years in prison. So he's my age, he's 71, and he feels threatened if he winds up in prison.
Right.
Am I the only one that gets the shivers every time I hear Broward County? I've never heard Broward County and anything good together in one sentence.
Yeah.
And I apologize to anybody who lives in Broward County. I did not mean that to be offensive. I'm just telling you what I saw in the news.
Yeah, just look at our last few elections. It always seems to come down to Broward County.
Yes, it does.
Started with Bush and Gore.
And that's where
back in the day.
Sheriff Israel, the shooting that took place. I mean, it's
Parkland.
all right there in the same area. Yep.
Well, you promised us an hour and a half, and it's been an amazing hour and a half.
I know.
I've learned so much, and I
Well,
appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me on.
And anybody and everybody that had questions that didn't get answered, please DM him directly. You can find him at Dan Henley 4. Our moderators, third night in a row, Twitter is unable or not allowing our moderators to put links up. But if you go to his Twitter account, you can find not only him, but you'll be able to find his 911.org
Yes.
website.
And I've got a couple of the other links that I have put down into the description area. If it doesn't show up as a link, you should still be able to copy and paste it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well,
yes, sir.
We appreciate your time, Dan. We appreciate everybody that's watching this show now and in later. And we appreciate our moderators for everything they do before, during, and after show. And then we appreciate Duncan for all he does, and prayers for your mom's continued health.
Thank you.
And your dog there.
Yeah, he always likes to come back and say, hey, always at the same time.
Because he knows it's going outside for a walk.
Exactly. He knows about to go to the bathroom.
Do you have anything, last thing you would like to say, Dan?
No, just join us on the website, at the top of the page. It's real easy to join us, and you'll get a periodic emailings on our progress. And what we do.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for coming on this show and doing what you're doing, because, you know, sadly, telling the truth anymore is probably the hardest thing that you can do, because your life gets destroyed in the process. And, you know, you've got your integrity still, you've got your commitment to God still, which is all that's going to matter in the long run. But I just want you to know that you are in my prayers, you're in Steve's prayers, you're in pretty much everybody that's in our chat's prayers right now as well, because we know that you're going to be vindicated. When this is all over, you're not going to be look like we are right now as the crazy conspiracy theorists. You're going to be the guy that saw things way before others were able to open their hearts and minds up to see it. And, you know, as rough as it may seem right now and as rough as it has been, it's going to get so much better. And I hope that you make that $4 million that you've lost back in book sales when the truth comes out. I mean, God has a way of working. God has a way of taking care of the people that are doing the right thing and being shat on in the process. But you're going to be all right, man. And you're a good soul. And I know that we're all appreciative of what you're coming out and doing, because too many people are just afraid. And we need to have courage.
Thank you for your kind words, thoughts, and prayers there, Duncan.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it. We'll
Yes,
see what
sir.
happens with the book.
Absolutely.
It's a tell-all book, as is the documentary we're filming down here right now. It's going to tell everything.
Nice. If I was there in your area, I would be helping you with this documentary. But you're a
that'd be
long
great.
way from home.
I guess one real personal question, real quick. Do you get to fly anymore while you're living in Pakistan? Do you fly at all?
I lost my medical.
So they don't even let you fly over.
No.
Okay.
Besides that, I'm 71 and been away from it for a while, and I don't know if I'd even trust myself behind the controls.
Okay. I didn't know if you had a little plane, just flew around.
No.
Okay.
Well, perfect.
All right.
Guys, I want to thank everybody again for joining us for another episode of Patriot Transition Voice. We will be back Monday, and we're going to have, hopefully, a little surprise for you guys next week. And we're going to do a little Christmas giveaway one day next week as well. We will let you know on Twitter. I want to thank our guest. I want to thank Steve. I want to thank all the moderators and our viewers that come enjoy the show. Like I said, we would not be able to do it without you. We are one gigantic Patriot Transition Voice family, and I certainly appreciate all of you. That being said, guys, I want you to have a lovely weekend. Stay relaxed a little bit. I know things are stressful right now, but everything's going to be good in the end. And next week is another week, something to look forward to. That being said, that brings us to our end broadcast, the National Anthem Star Spangled Banner by our friend Blue Eyes Abby Cook. Thank you, guys. Where we go on, we go off.
Where we go on, we go off.
Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag